Shalom and welcome to your Israel News Update for the 9th of April, 2026. I'm your host, Yishai Fleisher, and it was the second holiday of Passover, right? Passover's got the first days and the last days. On the last days of Passover, the seventh day of Passover, we got a rumor, although we were mostly incommunicado because of the observance, we got a rumor that there was going to be a ceasefire, and partially excited about that, partially also braced for an impact, because usually when we follow the modus operandi of Hamas and Hezbollah, they usually fire volleys at the very last moments before a ceasefire. And indeed, that's what happened. We were in Jerusalem when 1:30 in the morning, a giant boom close to Israel's parliament took place. That's where we were. However, a ceasefire seems to be gingerly holding right now out there in the field, although already threats that it's going to break. First, you can see here, it says just a day earlier, that was Wednesday night, Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, but the truce was contingent on Iran reopening the Straits of Hormuz, something it has reportedly refused to do. In fact, they fired on a ship as long as Israel refused to halt its campaign against the Iran-backed Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon. Now, the U.S. president has renewed his threat to use force against Iran if it doesn't comply with the ceasefire. And this is what he put out. He said, all U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place in and around Iran until such a time as the real agreement is reached and fully complied with. Okay, so we have definitely a situation where there is a truce on the one hand. This is after 40 days of war. But on the other hand, it's very ginger, and there's been some violence back and forth, mostly with Lebanon. Israel is striking hard against Lebanon. And the Iranians, I'm just explaining now a little bit of analysis, the Iranians are saying, look, the Hezbollah militia in Lebanon, which is attacking Israel and has, put on its flag the goal of destroying Israel, there needs to be a ceasefire there as well. They're our allies and our brothers. They are our organization. And Israel and the United States says, no way can we stop our war with Lebanon. We got to push these people back so that we can create safety for the northern communities. Northern Israel borders southern Lebanon, and it's been under fire all this time. So right now, that is the issue that is in contention. Here is U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance on the issue of the fight in Lebanon.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful. That's not because that is part of the ceasefire. I think that's the Israelis trying to set us up for success, and we'll, of course, see how that unfolds in the next few days. But look, if Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Okay, so a few comments here. First thing is that it's a little bit not understandable what the vice president is talking about, because Israel did the opposite of checking itself. Actually, it struck 100 targets in 10 minutes. It was a massive strike against terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Just as the ceasefire was announced, Israel very much saying, we're going to continue the war in Lebanon. And so Israel's still at war, but right now with Iran and a ceasefire, Iran's got to decide if it's going to let that ceasefire hold. President Trump saying, I'm watching the situation closely. I want my military ships, my naval ships, to be passing through the Straits of Hormuz, and we're going to see if indeed shipping is moving forward. The other thing that I wanted to show you today was Prime Minister Netanyahu's address to the people of Israel in Hebrew with subtitles. I'll help translate as well. But Prime Minister Netanyahu came on right after the end of the holiday, the seventh day of Passover, which is a major holiday in Israel. And you got to appreciate that kids are not in school, but usually they'd be getting back to school. Comes on Prime Minister Netanyahu and he says, listen, we've done a lot in this war. This is where we're at. I want you to see the real picture. And he's also competing with some of his political challengers, especially Yair Lapid, head of the opposition, who says this war has been a big failure. Here comes Netanyahu trying to say, not at all. It's been an awesome success. And the ceasefire is a success of our operations that have degraded Iran substantially, the Iranian regime substantially. Let's watch Prime Minister Netanyahu as he came on the telly to tell the nation about the ceasefire and about what it means for our future.
אזרחי ישראל, אני רוצה להודות לכם. אני רוצה להודות לעם הנפלא שלנו. כשאתם גיליתם חוסן, כשאתם ישבתם בממ"דים ובמקלטים, אנחנו השגנו יחד הישגים אדירים.
Okay, so the first phrase is really to tell you that the fact that the Israeli people, like our family and all the families of Israel, we've been living in bomb shelters for the last 40 days. He says, while you guys were in bomb shelters and showed resilience, our Air Force and Mossad and others were striking hard at the enemy and had great successes.
לוחמינו בחזית ואתם בעורף. אבל לפני הכל, אני מבקש להרכין ראש בפני יקירינו שנפלו במערכה הזאת. לחבק את המשפחות השכולות ולשלוח בשם כולכם איחולי החלמה מהירה ליקירינו הפצועים.
Okay, so before we go on and enumerate the successes, let's take a moment and bow our heads before all those who have been injured and killed, warriors and civilians. Let's take a moment and stop and respect the fallen.
אחיי ואחיותיי, מדינת ישראל השיגה הישגים אדירים, הישגים שעד לא מזמן היו נראים דמיוניים לגמרי.
Okay, giant successes, they were imaginary, and it's true if you just for a second remember that the war with Iran was a shadow war and now it became a frontal war. That is what he's talking about. He's saying it's been a tremendous success, the frontal war, and the fact that we brought it out of the shadows and struck against our enemies on the head and really killed the heads. He's going to talk about that of our enemies.
איראן חלשה מאי פעם, ישראל חזקה מאי פעם. זו השורה התחתונה של המערכה הזו עד לרגע זה. ואני מבקש להבהיר, יש לנו עוד יעדים להשלים, ואנחנו נשיג אותם, או בהסכמה, או בחידוש הלחימה.
Okay, so right here, the Prime Minister is saying, don't doubt for one second that I'm willing to re-enter the battlefield. We're taking a pause, and we're going to reach our goals, but if I have to go back to war, I can and I will. And he did prove in the Gaza war that he was willing to take a stop and then re-enter the war later. That's what happened.
כי אנחנו ערוכים לחזור ללחימה בכל רגע שידרש. האצבע על ההדק.
Okay, the finger is on the trigger. I'm willing to reinstate war.
כפי שאתם יודעים, הלילה נכנסה לתוקפה הפסקת אש זמנית בת שבועיים בין ארצות הברית לבין איראן, בתיאום מלא עם ישראל. לא.
Okay, so there's no surprise here. We entered now into a 2-week ceasefire together with the United States against our common enemy, Iran.
הם לא הפתיעו אותנו ברגע האחרון. עכשיו אני מבקש להדגיש, זה איננו סיומה של המערכה. זו תחנה בדרך להשגת כל היעדים שלנו. איראן נכנסת למשא ומתן הזה כשהיא מוכה, כשהיא חלשה מאי פעם. היא התחייבה לפתוח את מצרי הורמוז לאחר שהיא ויתרה על כל התנאים המקדימים שהיא הציבה. היא ויתרה על ביטול הסנקציות, קבלת פיצויים, סיום סופי של המלחמה וגם הפסקת אש בלבנון.
Okay, so this is very contentious. He says Iran has entered into these negotiations weaker than before, and it gave up all of its all of its gambits, initial gambits for the negotiations, except for that last part is not exactly correct, where he says that they were willing to give up on stopping Israel from continuing the battle in Lebanon. The position of the Iranians is no. We wanted a ceasefire along with the ceasefire in Lebanon, and so that's what the J.D. Vance video that I showed you is. There is some disagreement whether the ceasefire has to do with Lebanon. There's no question that Israel is not willing to do that, was not willing to do that, and struck immediately at Lebanon when the ceasefire with Iran started. In fact, I would say that one of the goals of this ceasefire is to let Israel focus on the battle in Lebanon, to push back the Hezbollah terrorists so that Israel can have safety on its northern border, which is a big complaint here in Israel. It's a big political challenge for Netanyahu as well.
בשעה שאיראן חלשה מאי פעם, ישראל חזקה כפי שלא הייתה מעולם. לפני 6 שבועות, לראשונה בהיסטוריה, יצאנו למלחמה כתף אל כתף עם ידידי הנשיא טראמפ ובעלת בריתנו הגדולה ארצות הברית.
Okay, so now he's focusing, Prime Minister Netanyahu is telling the nation, we went to war together in a really unique, unprecedented historical teamwork between the United States and Israel as a joint strike force with my friend, says Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump. The reason that's important is because he's going to show that there are some people who claim that there's a distance between U.S. and Israel, and he says it's laughable.
יצאנו למבצע היסטורי, למבצע הגדול ביותר שידע המזרח התיכון. דבר כזה מעולם לא היה בתולדות ישראל. שותפות כזאת בין ישראל לארצות הברית נגד האויב הגדול ביותר שלנו, גם היא לא הייתה מעולם בתולדות ישראל. וכן, אני יכול להרגיע את מי שדואג ליחסים ביני ובין הנשיא טראמפ, איך הוא אמר, you guys are great. אנחנו מדברים כל יום, ואנחנו מחייכים כשאנחנו שומעים את הערכות הללו.
This was actually a political stab. There are competitors to Prime Minister Netanyahu who want to say that this war has been a failure, that it has not achieved its goals, and that the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu are not good. And so those efforts to besmirch Netanyahu, he is making it clear, no, it's a joke. I have excellent relations. Israel has excellent relations with the United States. And those folks that are trying to besmirch me and my good name, and that's one of the tactics of the opposition, are wrong. I have an excellent relationship with the United States. We're going to go on with the Netanyahu speech in just a second. I just want to remind you that you can help us continue to fight the narrative war. And the way we're going to do that is by fighting together and building together. And that's why I ask you to go to buildisrael.com. Buildisrael.com is our new, and we're very proud of it, our very new website to support our broadcasts and our teaching and our restoration of biblical sites in the land of Israel and making God's name great again. That is, you know what? See, I got to change that. Let me change that. It's not make God great again. People pointed out to me that God is always great. So it's really make God's name, God's name great again. That's what we mean to say, okay? So let's show that. There you go. Make God's name great again. That's what we're doing here. So you can definitely go to buildisrael.com and also follow us and our Israel news updates at yishai.tv. And don't forget that another great way and a simpler way to support the show is through buymeacoffee.com/Yishai. Thank you very much. And of course, when you send me blessings, I send you blessings. And I can't thank you enough for your support. It makes all the difference in the world. Back to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
בכל אופן, מי שבוחר להתעלם מעוצמת השותפות הזאת, פשוט מתעלם מן האמת. כפי שאמר היום שר המלחמה האמריקני פיט הקסט, הערכה כלפי ישראל כבעלת ברית בשדה הקרב, הערכה על הגבורה שלנו, על האומץ שלנו, על המיומנות שלנו. הערכה הזאת מרקיעה שחקים.
Okay, so the cooperation between the U.S. and Israeli Air Force is now the stuff of legends. They're talking about it all the time, and it's become a great success story. And there's audio recordings of pilots talking to one another, and there's just great respect. And Israel has shown itself to be really a global fighting force. I don't know if the word global level, global uh, standard fighting force, maybe one of the best in the world, along with the United States, and is really crushing the Iranian regime to the point that they were willing to go into the ceasefire.
הנשיא טראמפ, דונלד חברי, אני רוצה להודות לך על המנהיגות שלך ועל הידידות שלך. החברות העמוקה בינינו, הידידות העמוקה בין ארצות הברית לישראל, משנה את פני המזרח התיכון.
Okay, the unity between Israel and the United States is changing the face of the Middle East, and that is undoubtedly true. And that unity is not between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden or President Obama, where Israel was subdued, subjugated, and made small, but rather it's big together with a president of the United States who thinks big and wants to see Israel be a powerful ally.
יצאנו יחד כדי להסיר איום קיומי מעל מדינת ישראל ומעל העולם החופשי כולו. ואת המשימה הזאת אנחנו מבצעים. אנחנו מבצעים אותה שלב אחר שלב, יעד אחר יעד. אם לא היינו יוצאים לעם כלבי, ואחר כך אם לא היינו יוצאים לשאגת הארי, לאיראן כבר היה מזמן נשק גרעיני.
Okay, this is a very important aspect of the Netanyahu speech, and it's in Hebrew, and that's why I'm also translating it into English, which is that he says if Iran was allowed to go without being warred upon, if it was not struck, then guess what? They would have had nuclear weapons, and if it wasn't for the two operations, Rising Lion and Epic Fury, and then these names, if it wasn't for the twin operations that first took out their air defense system, and then later on the 40 days war on Iran, it was like the 12-day war. Now it's the 40-day war. If it wasn't for those, Iran would have had nuclear weapons, and the danger would have been to Israel, and the danger would have been to the world. And there are elements out there today that want to tell us that Israel is a danger to the world. And there was some sick tweet by Candace Owens, and she says, Israel is the great threat to this world. Of course not. Israel is not a threat to this world. Israel is the harbinger of peace, of forward thinking, of technology, and of course God's presence, and Jerusalem, the light of Jerusalem, which is shining through the vehicle of the rebirth of the state of Israel in the land of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu getting on the television last night, giving the nation an update that indeed we're going into a 2-week ceasefire. The goals are yet to be fully met, but huge successes. Kudos to the Israeli nation for standing strong through these attacks, through these rocket attacks, and we've had quite a bit of losses as well. And certainly kudos to the U.S. Israel fighting force, joint fighting force that has struck so hard against the enemies of the world. The opening of the Hormuz Straits, and also, by the way, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits as well, which are into the Red Sea. Still, we'll see. It's still ginger out there, and it could be that fighting resumes at any time. However, it's important to note that Israel went into instant like normalization. Like they told us the schools are back on, and they said the airport's opening up, and it's like went from red to green. There was no yellow. It was like green. And so either they know what we don't know about how ginger or not or stable this ceasefire is, but one thing is for sure is that there was a great yearning to return to normalcy, and Israel has indeed, in a kind of jolt, come back to normalcy. Finally, here on your Israel News Update with Yishai Fleisher, your host, I want to remind you this week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Shemini, which is in the book of Leviticus. And this Torah portion which you can see here is chapter 9, Leviticus, verse 1, and it's really about um, uh, the sacrifices being the priests being what's the word, being installed. That's right, and the installation of the priests to serve God in the temple. Then there's the very, very tricky story, the hard story of the fire that killed the two sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and he was left with two other sons who became the priest and the high priest later on. And then later on, there is the long discussion about the kosher animals that one may eat. You see, it says the following are the creatures that you may eat among all the land animals. Any whose feet are cloven, completely split, meaning to say have to have split hooves and chew their cud. And also a discussion of, and also a discussion of which birds we are allowed to eat and which fish we are allowed to eat according to the biblical command. For example, a pig may have split hooves, but does not chew its cud. All that is found in the Torah portion that we read this Shabbat. And that's also part of the update here, because you got to know what's going on in the land of Israel, because wherever you are part of this amazing renewal and rebirth of the Jewish people are part of. And that is a global rebirth of God showing up through the rebuilding of his city, Jerusalem. Here at Israel News Update with Yishai Fleisher, we try to make God's name great again. We ask you to join us to keep building the land of Israel at buildisrael.com. You can find more great stuff, including an ability to like, comment, and subscribe. That makes a big difference at Yishai Fleisher TV or just yishai.tv on the internet. And very finally, buymeacoffee.com/Yishai. And very, very finally, I'm sending you blessings from the land of blessings and heart from the heartland of the Holy Land. God bless you wherever you are, and shalom.